discourse says that that's problematic, right? It problematizes the body as a mechanism of arriving at knowledge. What I want to say is it's important that we recognize this historical discourse, but it's also important that we move beyond that. It's also important that we recognize the body not as problematized, not as given and prone to error, but the body as the sole mechanism of accessing the given truths, if you will, in small t. The given truths, more in an inference to the best explanation, scientific inference to the best explanation. Our body is the sole mechanism with which we access information in the world. Period. Without this, there is no world, right? And I don't mean that in a world contingent mind, right? I don't mean that in that sense. There is no world for us. There is no means of accessing it. Of course, there's a mind-independent world that exists independent to us. But how would we ever know of it? Right? How would we ever know of it? Descartes would say without the mind. I would say without the body. Right? Without the physical body, without the physical structure, without my senses, how would I ever gain access to that? I couldn't. Right? I couldn't. I would cease to be. So that finally my existence and my epistemological access to the truths of the world, the mind-independent world with a small t, is only solely available via my body. So rather than demonizing and problematizing and critiquing the body, I think it's more important that we elevate and recognize and embrace and love, in a sense, right? And give proper respect to the body as the sole vehicle of accessing the truths of the world. So the last bit in the implications, the ability requires keen attention to both inductive and deductive reasoning. Right? As I said previously in the past hour, it's important that we understand the role and the function of induction and deduction. Right? The rigorous deductive mechanisms from a hypothesis drawing a necessary conclusion where all my premises are true and my conclusion is true is perfect. But there is a sense in which we want to be able to generalize from an instance, and that generalization begins via context-specific physiological interpretation. I'll say that again, because that was a mouthful, right? So hopefully I didn't get there too deep and too quick. But the generalization that we arrive at via analysis of the world, in terms of sense data, in terms of research-based participation, interaction, what have you, in terms of just sheer abstraction and theoretical contemplation, becomes context-specific. That analysis is context-specific. How is it context-specific? It's context-specific via my physiology, my physical body. My physical body is the context. That's it. That's absolutely important. I can't stress that enough, right? My physical body is the context with which I then interpret that information. That information being the mind-independent world and the facts thereof. The context of interpretation is the physical body. Thus, the physical body becomes the context-specific mechanism, the physiological context-specific mechanism that offers me, as a human being, an opportunity to interpret the mind-independent world. That, come on, man. Come on, man. That's not this. That's not the weak body. That's not the decadent, feeble body, right? That's the more powerful body. And I don't mean it in terms of strength and physical stature. I don't even mean it in terms of intellectual ability. I mean it in terms of what it really is at base level. It is our sole access to the world. And without recognizing that, without legitimizing that, this machine, I'm gonna calm down now because I'm getting a little excited. But without recognizing it for what it is, you undervalue it, right? You undervalue it. And I think epistemologists of the past have been notorious for undervaluing the role of the body because of Descartes, but ultimately because of Plato, right? Because of the demarcation between sort of presence in this existence and transcendence. Okay, so enough of that. So in the last section on the importance of demonstration and how, right? I love that quote, and I live my life by this, right? My philosophy isn't something that I do in the recesses of this office, or in the recesses of my mind, or in the quiet of my home. I live this philosophy. This philosophy is a life practice for me, and in a daily life, a minute by minute life practice, right? All of the things that I've read from all of the different philosophers have transformed the way in which I live my life, because I recognize the role of my body more. Right? I recognize the role of my body, and I would never, ever, ever, ever undermine it. Right? It is the most powerful force that I have in this world, that we have in this world. You can believe that or not, but I'm out here to preach. Okay, so first bullet point, this is a direct quote from the book. There is still no real connection between your thinking or believing what you do and its being so. There's still no real connection between what you believe and what is. At best, you have a thought or a belief which just happens to be true. But that is no more than coincidence and not knowledge. Right? So that we as perceivers in the world need to recognize a very, very important thing, and philosophers give this example all the time, right? This is not an example that's unique to me. Every philosophy 101 epistemology course has this example in some form, and it's a pretty cool example. The first time I heard it, I was like, oh wow, okay, I get it, right? You can imagine that the perceiver is looking at, and I happen to have a red square, right? So the perceiver is looking at a red square. What we'll find out is that there are two properties, right? I'm jumping ahead here because I'm giving you an empiricist analysis, and the discourse now is supposed to be situated in terms of Cartesian sort of Cartesian analysis, but it doesn't really matter. There are two characteristics, right? There are two qualities. Roughly speaking, right? There are two qualities. They're what are known as primary and secondary. And later in the lecture series, I'll go into more account of this in more detail. But right now, just generally speaking, there's two qualities of this red square. There is the fact that it is a square, as defined technically as an enclosed four-sided figure, each angle at 90 degrees. Totaling 360-degree angle, interior angle, right? So that's what a square is, right? It's an enclosed four-sided figure where each angle in that figure is at 90 degrees, and the summation of all of those angles total 360 degrees. That's the definition of a square, right? There might be more to it, but I can't think of anything else to add. That sort of properly defines what a square is. Okay, so that's a quality of the square. The definitional account that I just gave is a quality of, it's a characteristic of the square. There's also a secondary quality, a secondary characteristic within the square, and that being the square's redness. Right? So the square is also red. You can imagine then that two people are perceiving one in the same red square. So two people are perceiving one in the same red square. I'm perceiving the square, and someone else is perceiving the square. Insofar as we're perceiving the square, we're perceiving the primary quality being the definitional account of a square that I gave just a few seconds ago. But it's the secondary quality, it's the secondary aspect, it's the secondary characteristics of the square where everything gets a little gray. Imagine that I am colorblind, and when I perceive the square, I really perceive the red square as being green. What I think to be red really is green because of my color blindness. And you put really in scare quotes even, right? But what I perceive to be red is, for all practical purposes, green. And this is easy. We know that this is like scientific fact, right? I think, I'm not positive, but I think that people who are colorblind perceive red as green. Now, So I'm perceiving